Set Championships is 1 week away, and with that, this kind of evolving metagame has come from the Disney Lorcana challenges last weekend. So not everyone can just pick up Emerald Steel, Amber Steel, and just have like, hey, a $500 deck laying around. The good news is for you is today I have the best budget deck, and it comes with some proof. Last weekend at DLC Vegas, 3 members of TFM all took Amethyst Steel into the Saturday competitives, the Friday competitives, the Sunday competitives, and the DLC itself for Vegas. This $68 deck won over $2,500 in prizes, and today I'm here to bring it to you and break it all down. Let's get into it. Let's start with the groundwork that went into this deck, and we're going to actually mold and show you different iterations and the evolution of where this deck started and where this deck ended. This was the original list going into the DLC, and I'd like to kind of talk for a moment about how we got there. The cool thing about this list, on honesty, was I was just sitting home one day watching Wonderland stream over on Twitch, which I'll have his description link below. Great guy, great content, streams pretty often during the daylight hours, I would say. So if you're looking for some constant gameplay on Pixelborn Connect, he's definitely great for that. But the one morning I was watching him play this deck, and it wasn't that it was flashy. It was more or less that he was just winning games, and I think it was mostly because his opponents didn't honestly have an answer. And therefore, I kind of copied the deck, brought it over, brought it to one of our gameplay testing nights where I just ported the deck into Tabletop Simulator, and then from there we were off to the races. What we learned very quickly is that this deck on the play is deadly, and I mean like deadly, which is very cool and interesting because in the day at a Disney Lorcana Challenge, you get 9 games on the play, which means if you can win all 9 of those, start 9-0 on the day, just knowing, hey, I only need 5 more wins, that's a big deal. Getting to 14 is kind of the most important factor of all of it. So having a deck that's so powerful on the play and really very difficult for opponents to interact with on the draw is definitely something that's enticing for all players. But the idea that this deck was only $78, I think this version of it might have been cheaper. There were versions with Castle, which made it a little more expensive. There were versions with more rares, made it a little more expensive. But as we get into the DLC, you'll see that it gets cheaper and cheaper. And first and foremost, Dick Burns took this to, I think, 4 different locals, won all 4 locals, was testing locally with one of his friends, James, playing different games, different matchups that we were a little bit worried of. And it was just showing like, hey, this deck has a true impact, a true meaning. So let's break down this deck by the cost and kind of go through the purpose of each and every card being selected in these various deck lists. The ones: Chernobog's Followers, Magic Broom, Maleficent, Pascal, Captain Hook, and Mickey Mouse, Food Fight Defender. I believe Chernobog's and Magic Broom are the most obvious to understand here. The concept is very simple. Cheap, efficient, draw in your deck when needed. The truth, I think, behind this is that for this particular list, we are very often keeping these characters in play and forcing our opponent to interact with them. The card draw is not as important in most cases until literally the last turn of the game. It's very often that this past weekend, I would have a setup of maybe 1 or 2 brooms and a Chernobog follower in play on the final turns. And really all I'm doing is dumping them away either before, a card like Be Prepared or a card like Sisu, if I knew that like my opponent was going to shift, or kind of like I was like walking into or forced to walk into a shift line. Grab Your Swords, all those things that can definitely just wipe all these characters out. We want to get a use out of them before then. But in most cases, they just sit and play, they turn sideways, they gain lore, and when in doubt, we can take trades. There are cards that we do not want to see hit play. So very often shift lines, if our opponent offers up a goon, a Robin or a Queen and things like that, Chernobog's Followers will run into it. If our opponent offers up a Cinderella, we're going to run into it for sure. We're going to take those trades because we don't have an efficient way to deal with the the bigger threats, like the bigger Robin Hoods, the bigger Cinderellas, the bigger Queens, they're a lot more harder for us to work with. So this deck looks like an aggro deck, and honestly, it is, but it has the ability to play into that role of just saying, I will take a trade when it makes sense. And in most cases, those things do make sense. But at the end of a game, when we just have the library out, which we'll talk about in a little bit, it's very, very common to have two Brooms in the library, play a character, and pop and draw 4 cards just to re-threaten the board or look for a closing way to kind of win the game on that given turn. Maleficent is really a fun debate within the team because it's a card that I believe is a necessary evil to get to a lore count that's comfortable to win games against the more controlling decks. But it's also a 1/1 that's uninkable. It can be cloggy. It can be not what we want in every matchup. This is not a card that we just want to see on turn 1 in every matchup, and therefore it could be the worst one drop in the deck, ironically, even though it's the only one that gains 2 lore, on the little right side of the character there. But I digress. It's kind of a fun debate between the team. Pascal, MVP. Card is so good in everything. It is a little bit worse into Emerald decks and Diablos and things like that. But if they're not singing with Diablo, if they're not gaining lore with Diablo, it does give us more time to find the answers that we need for said Diablo. So even if it's just a shield that's saying, hey, get an answer me, that's great. There was also definitely times on the weekend where I took 2 Pascals and ran it into a Diablo just to get it off the board. Yeah, I'm giving up 2 lore and things like that, but if it's getting rid of a card that's creating card advantage for my opponent, definitely well worth the trade for sure. Captain Hook was in very early iterations of the deck. It was honestly there to kind of answer the mirror aggro matchups. In this case, it felt like the right card to have. It felt like saving the damage on Smee was all correct. So it was playing a few different roles, but in the end, card just isn't what we want it to be. And it really wasn't the card that we needed to be. The card that we needed to be was what I like to call Sticky Mickey. Mickey Mouse Food Fight Defender, a 1 cost, 1 strength, 2 willpower, 1 lore with resist 1. Yeah, I will say very often on the weekend, my opponents thought that I was playing a 1 cost 1/2 with vanilla text, and very often ran their goons into it. And I just took my die and put a damage counter on it because they didn't realize it had resist 1. I actually had an opponent that even swung in with a Tinkerbell to do 2 damage to my Mickey Mouse, and I put a die on it, and he was very confused. So, little pointer there, make sure you read your opponent's cards. I don't know why anyone would think you would ever go into a Lorcana tournament with a 1 cost 1/2 vanilla. That is not a very good card. So the card had to have text on it for it to be playable. So yeah, just if you don't know what a card does, ask your opponent, ask them to see the card, read the card. That's just a general tip for you guys. But Sticky Mickey was phenomenal. It really was one of the best cards to play against Amber Steel, which is one of our worst matchups. It was also a very good card against Emerald Steel, which is another one of our worst matchups. And honestly, it just stuck around. It really was a sticky Mickey because it was very difficult to interact with and deal with. And it was just a nuisance for our opponents. This card, on average, gained more lore than Maleficent. It also may have traded with more characters than any other character in our deck. So much so that, even introducing combat tricks to this deck because of him, such as Crab, such as Mickey 2, the flag bearer. I can't remember his name right now, but he comes in and buffs a character by giving it Challenger 2. These cards might be good additions to a deck like this that wants to be a little more mid-range because of just how much annoying Sticky Mickey really is. So it's definitely one of those cards that if you've never played a game with it or a game against it, I suggest you do. It really is just like the glue that keeps this 1 cost curve really just so very powerful. Now, these are all the 1-drop characters in the deck. I want to talk about some of the other additional 1 cost cards that you definitely need in this list. Fire the Cannons and Befuddle. Very often times, the best turns for this deck which is why you're seeing, versions of this list with 18 one-cost characters is a one-cost character on one. And then we honest hope and pray that our opponent plays a one-drop card because, very often not, they know what you're doing. They know your aggressive starts, and they're trying to get characters in play. They're mulliganing for these characters they play. Very often it's a Chernobog follower. So if your opponent goes Chernobog follower on one, and you're like, cool, my turn two is ink, fire the cannons, your one cost, and then play another one cost. All of a sudden, we are now turning cards sideways. We're off to the races against Ruby Amethyst. We are totally punishing them because now they might not have Snake, or they're going to go into Flynn Rider, which we just don't care about. Against Ruby Sapphire, they're playing T-Pose earlier. We don't give a crap. Get rid of it. Get it off the board. There's even worlds where we befuddle a Popsicle. Not as common. We much rather probably save our own card later on from a Maui or things like that. But if we know that our opponent, goes Popsicle into one jump and they're looking to get that turn three Hiram on board to start kind of fueling the fire and getting into a better position in the game, we can befuddle it and we can just take that turn away, force them to play another card, and maybe even keep them off the board longer. Definitely all things that you need to consider when playing this deck, but these two cards both are honestly some of the best cards in the deck. Fire the Cannons, I don't think there was ever a deck in the history of Lorcana that was a better Fire the Cannons deck than this deck. That's a direct quote from Dick Burns. Obviously, huge advocate for this list. So as we continued on, we definitely went through different iterations of this list, and this was the deck that we ended up settling on for the first competitive event on Friday. This was the list that Dick Burns and I both registered, and both of us took this list to a top 32 in the competitive Friday event. I actually started the event 4-0-1. I was undefeated through 4 rounds. I took the worst matchup in this in the deck, which is Amber Steel. Did not have the optimal draw, but that was when I learned things about the list that we needed to mold and change to give us a better opportunity in that matchup on the play and on the draw, which we're going to talk about in the next version of this list. But you can see here we had Pinocchio, wasn't in the first list. We had the Sticky Mickeys, wasn't in the first list. We are also looking at cards like Bosses on the Roll, which is a card that we're going to talk about and why that fits so well in this list. Pete was another one of those cards. It was a 4 of early. We decided we brought it down to a 2. There are all these kind of pieces that we were putting together, which is the reason we even decided to play the deck on Friday. In all honesty, the deck felt like one of the best decks in the format leading up to Vegas. And then we got to the DLC and into our Airbnb, and on Thursday, we were starting to have doubts. The matchups that we thought we were favored into, on the draw wasn't really there. We had to figure out ways to make the draw games more, winnable against decks like Ruby Sapphire, against decks like Amber Steel, even Ruby Amethyst. Those matchups were becoming more and more difficult on the draw once we understood the matchup. Insert Cusco. Cusco was a card that was not on that first deck list. It was not even thought of, honestly, at all. But what I had realized is that this deck was running out of steam early, and we needed a way of a character that just got in play and replaced itself. We don't always trade in Chernobog's followers. We don't always trade in Magic Brooms. Like in most cases, we were leaving them in play until they gain maximum lore, until we know for a fact that we're going to lose them. We definitely very often offer them up as trading for our opponent, because if they're taking those out, they're probably leaving other things in that are more important. Cusco, the opposite. We're going to put that card in play, and we're just going to tell our opponent, get ahead. Like, get ahead and get rid of it. No, we don't have craps in this deck. We don't have any other ways to buff Cusco, to send him in for a trade, to get replacement. We don't care about that. We're just putting that card in play, turning him sideways, questing his way. Our opponent's eventually going to have to answer him. He's the greatest card ever into the B prep turns. Very often this deck kind of gets to a point. It knows it can't win the game, so it has to put enough pressure in play that basically forces a Be Prepared or forces a Grab Your Swords. And Cusco is the perfect card in those turns. We're like, all right, we're going to add another lord to the table, but this one lets me gain card advantage back. It says, nope, we're going to replace. We'll just pick our card up. That's fine. Like the card will go away. I'll draw a card, replaces it. In most cases, it might be a 2 lore character or a way to gain 2 lore, or it's just another straight replacement to it. Pinocchio was another card that we felt we could protect it well with the Fuddle, with the Snake, with the Fox. We can definitely gain, 3, 6, 9 lore with it. There was a game where I believe I did gain 9 lore with Pinocchio. But you'll see as we move forward, we just decided that card was not correct. Once you realize that Maleficent as a 1/1 for 2 lore for 1 is like really on the cusp of like playable in this deck, you kind of figure out the Pinocchio, even though gaining 1 lore, costing 1 more, it's nice to have, but it's also very vulnerable and it's like not exactly what we want to be doing with our uninkables. So we'll discuss that kind of moving forward. But let's take a look at the other cards in this list. Before we get to those 2 cost cards and breaking them down, I want to give a pitch to the Bad for the Brand shirt. That's right. Dick Burns is bad for the brand of the Forbidden Mountain. It's a kind of running inside joke between the team, but I really wanted to give a shout out to it. Any of those Dick Burns fans out of there that wanted to pick up a shirt, the link will be in the pinned comments below. Also, the link to the merch store in the description below if you're looking to support TFM in any way. This is a great way to do it. It's a funny way for you to kind of like take a dig at Dick Burns with us as we all really get enjoyment out of the comment that he is bad for the brand. So huge shout out to Dick Burns and making this shirt possible. Very excited. I was actually so very upset that I didn't get it in the mail in time for DLC Vegas. I was looking forward to walking into Friday event and playing with the shirt. Didn't happen. Got it afterwards, unfortunately. But if you're looking to support TFM, this is a wonderful way to do it. The 2 cost slot in the Doc's Library deck is definitely a Doc world. This character, 2 cost, uninkable, 1 strength, 3 willpower, 1 lore. And when you play this character, you may discard your hand to draw 2 cards. It is effectively a mini whole new world, but it's a you may, which means that you can also just put this character in play. There were very often times where in your mulligan, you don't want to see more than 1 Doc, but hey, card games are card games, and it definitely happens. And putting a 2 cost 1/3 into play on turn 2 generally will represent gaining lore. There's not a lot of ways to interact with him well. He's actually very good on the draw against Amber Steel and against Emerald Steel, which are some of our worst matchups, because it really is just a 3 willpower card that's going to gain you a lore, which is really what you're trying to get out of every card. Every card that we play in this deck, we are hoping it gains at minimum 1 lore or replaces itself in some way. Doc is the centerpiece of the deck. Comboing with Mana Mims, comboing with Foxes and Befuddles, like all of those cards work so very well with them as we get our engine out. And on often, we are not playing this card until turn 4. And on turn 4, where we're like basically playing 2 of any of these cards that we see in play. On average, we might, play a snake, pick up an inkable card, ink that card, and then play our Doc to draw 2 new cards if we've already gotten all the use out of our lower cost inkables. Some cases we just, are inking the snake itself and then playing a Smee and a Doc, putting 3 lore into play, drawing 2 new cards. Cusco, same concept. We're just putting Cusco into play, which is another threat to draw cards, dropping Doc, drawing 2 more cards. Pinocchio is another one that, we really wanted that card earlier, but, on these turn 4s where we're just like, hey, we're going to put 4 lore into play with our 2 uninkables that we had to pitch, but then draw 2 more cards and really just threaten, a nice percentage of lore gained through these characters. Gathering Knowledge and Wisdom has slowly become my favorite card in Shimmering Skies. The amount of games that I have won because of this card is immeasurable. I mean, your opponent is just sitting there. They know that you're gaining all this lore. They know that you're really just impacting the game so very quickly. And then at the end of the game, you're just like playing a Doc, you're drawing 2 cards, and you're hoping you draw into this card. You're putting your cards in the library, you're getting rid of them, you're hoping that you're drawing in this card. You never really want to see this card early, which is kind of the key reason why it's not a 4 of in this list. This is not a deck that is hoping to draw this card early. It's hoping it draws it exactly when it needs it. And very often or not, it is on turns 5 or 6 where your opponent may have turned the corner, may have been able to kind of like stave off the game. And all you're really looking to do is play a Doc, draw 2 cards, play another character, represent 3 or 4 lore on board with a library, with a Doc, with another character, and then say, okay, find a way to deal with this. And if you can't, you're going to gain your lore, play a Gathering Knowledge Wisdom, and win the game. Incredibly powerful card for 2 resources. 2 ink to gain 2 lore. like guarantee that your opponent cannot interact with, it's a very, very powerful card in Disney Lorcana. All right, so fast forward to the DLC. This is the deck that I registered and that Dick Burns registered for Vegas. I was able to take this deck to a 44-point finish, finishing 98th in the event. Dick had 41 points, just missing out on a Let It Go, 3 points shy. Ryan Miles also took this deck to a round 8, lost game 1 and conceded to his opponent because he could no longer make day 2, but had the ability to play out and finish with a 44-point record as well and chose not to. But these are the lists that was the final decision for DLC Vegas. And I want to talk about the cards that were added that you hadn't seen before. We went up on Sticky Mickey. Cards insane. Cards so good on the draw. Cards really great in our bad matchups. And it's fine even in our good matchups because it's just another annoying character that your opponent has to deal with. Trades the Chernobog's followers. Doesn't get banished by opposing goons. Just sticks around. Lives through Let the Storm Rage on. It's very, very annoying. Fire the Cannons is not a commonly played card, but it would survive Fire the Cannons. All very notable things, in all honesty. Smash was the other addition that we're going to talk about in a few seconds here, but it was very important to our on-the-draw games or just our very powerhouse single one games. Any game where we went turn 1, 1-drop, turn 2, 1-drop, 1-drop, on turn 3, Smash is probably our best card because it's protecting all of that lore early on, and it answers a bunch of problematic cards. Pete stated too, we actually lost Befuddle. We went from 4 Befuddles to 3 because we realized that we just didn't need that card as often, and in most cases, we were playing Befuddle later. Anytime that we were befuddling instead of Fire the Cannons, those were games that we were mostly losing. So we realized that it just isn't a card that we didn't actually want. We were much rather willing to just put in more 1 cost like Sticky Mickey. Bosses on a Roll, another card we're going to talk about soon. Amethyst Chromacon was the final edition. It's just another way to draw cards outside of needing dock and needing library. But this was the list that, like I said, put me into 44 points, winning me a Let It Go. You'll have noticed throughout the deck's evolution that Madam M Fox went from a 4 of to a 3 of. We realized that the games we were losing were games where we just got cluttered up in too many expensive cards in our opening hand. And Fox was just kind of the sacrifice. Pete, we had already realized we didn't need to win most games. It was more just like a chump card on turn 5 or 6 when we didn't have a good character to play, like our Cuscos and things like that. If we slam Pete, then we can't be Grabby Swords. We can't be prepared. We can kind of just be annoying to our opponent. But it was not a necessary thing to win games. It was more just like hey, this is what we're going to do on this turn. Moving forward, however, Pete might need to become a 4 of because against Ursula 3, she's a very big problem to the deck. And the best way to answer her, the best way to answer Ariel when we do not have Smash is Pete. We just say, all right, we're going to play Pete. Now your Ariel can't actually sing the card it found. Now your Ursula can't gain value from singing. We're kind of forcing our opponent to say, well, if you turn it sideways now and remove some of our lore threats, if they have to use their Ursula 3 to challenge rather than sing, that means, it's not singing, it's not drawing 2 cards, it's not removing 2 characters, it's only removing 1, and then our Pete can trade into it. Very often or not, that's not going to happen. So if it doesn't happen, what it means is that our characters in play get the turn sideways again, gain lore, and give us more chances to close out the game. Merlin Goat, obviously, Goat of Disney Lorcana, one of the best cards ever printed. It fills every role that you want it to be in just a way to gain lore and win a game effectively, or just hit play and say, I am always going to be worth 2 lore for 4 cost on a 4/3. Also important that into Sisus and things like that. More often than not, on turn 4 against Sisu decks, when we know that we can't answer the Sisu for the shift lines, putting a Goat into play is the best thing that we can do because it can't get removed from the Sisu shift action, and it actually can trade into Sisu, which is even better, to be all honest. Bosses on a Roll was one of those cards that we were playing in our Amber Amethyst decks. This was a card that, in all honesty, doesn't make a whole lot of sense until you play the card and understand what it does. Very often or not, this list is never singing this card. Honestly, I don't ever want to sing this card when I play it in this list. In Amber Amethyst, we had Baloo, we had Donald Duck. That were cards that we wanted to sing with just because like that lore it wasn't as important. In this deck, every single lore matters. So very often or not, we are playing this card on 5. We're actually going, all right, on 5, we're going to bosses on a roll. We're going to check out the next 5 cards. We're going to see if we can win the game. Like, in all honesty, that's what this is doing. It's setting up, finding our goats, finding our gathering knowledge and wisdoms, or in some cases, maybe even finding cards like Cusco or things like that as like another way to just move the game forward. Finding our docks is another perfect example. But very often, what would happen is this deck would just be like, all right, we're going to boss on roll. We're going to look at our top 5 cards deck. All right, we didn't see what we needed. We're going to put them all on the bottom because we need to close out games. And the only way to close out games is through GOAT, is through gathering knowledge and wisdom. So if you pick up 5 cards and they're not there, the best news is that this card gains you a lore and may have actually won you the game because it took 5 cards off the top of your deck that weren't going to win you the game. I know it's hard to see that, but that is exactly what it's doing. Taking a percentage of cards off your deck that would not win you the game, removing them from the equation and giving you better odds to draw into the cards that you most want to. Also, can definitely set up a runner-runner situation. More often than not, I might play this card on 3 just to set up dock into other cards that I need. Might be dock into a 1 cost, dock into another 2 cost. Not the best play ever, but in certain hands, you're kind of using this card to fix them. Very often or not, this card is being inked before you play your dock. Almost always. But in some situations, you look at your hand, you look at what you need to do to get to the next step in the game, you might set up your dock for turn 3. If you don't have a dock in your hand and you're just looking to like get out of it, most often than not, you're trying to like play an aerial because you're like, wow, my hand is so bad. I need to find my whole new world. It's kind of that situation where you're like, all right, I just need to play boss to find my dock to get out of this crap. Smash was the other iteration. Like, we realized very quickly on day 1, without Smash in the Friday competitive events, we didn't have answers to Ariel. We didn't have answers to Grandma Tala. We didn't have answers to Ursula 3. And these were all cards that were very problematic for it because they were giving our opponent a card when they played them, or they were creating 2-for-1s or even 3-for-1s that just we couldn't come back from. So a card like Smash was just this idea of like, hey, if our opponent is going to take that turn off to play their 3 willpower card and we just smash it, it's almost like a time walk. Like, yes, they might play Ariel, they might find the song they needed, but if they don't have the singer they need, awesome. They may have played the Ursula saying, I'm going to take a turn off, I'm going to put my Ursula into play, and I'm going to feel comfortable that my Ursula is going to sing 2 songs and get me back in the game. Smash says no. Grandma Tala's name. They might have went Popsicle on 1 jump on 2, play Grandma Tala, get a card from Tala, and now I have a 3/3 in play that's going to trade into characters, and I'm going to feel pretty good about that. If you just smash it, you just you just have another turn of just turning all your cards sideways. Smash was a great addition to this deck. I think it's honestly overlooked. And I bet you it's a card that most players are going to cut from this list. I think there's a world that this card goes to a 3 of now, in all honesty. It might be a staple for the deck rather than a flex spot. Just my humble opinion of a person that's played well over 100 games with this deck to this point. The library is, it is truly the best card in this deck. And then you're probably going to ask, well, why is it only 3 of on the list? The truth is, again, it goes back to that I can't see too many higher costing cards early on in games. I had to make a sacrifice somewhere. And the honest truth is we only need 1 library in a game. That's it. Now, well, I won't lie to you, like turn 1, character, turn 2, character, turn 3, library, it feels impossible to lose those games. So there is a world where going back to 4 libraries, it very well might be correct. Finding the room for it might be a little difficult, but in a world where Emerald Steel is king and it's the best deck in the meta or the most played deck in the meta, then having 4 locations with 8 willpower that read draw a card when my characters are banished, it might be a necessary evil moving forward. For the event, we decided to take 1 out. We really did. We felt comfortable going, you know what? We don't want to see 2 of these early because in all honesty, all we're doing is inking them. They're never actually hitting play. Very similar to gathering knowledge and wisdom. We want to see it when we need to see it in that perfect time. And in most cases, that's on turn 3 with a specific line on turns 1 and 2, or it's on turn 5 or 6. In a lot of cases, we're not playing this card until after we dock. So if on 4 we go 2 cost and 2 cost dock, draw 2 cards, and that card that we draw is library, we're kind of like rolling Yahtzee. It feels that good because the next turn we're like, yep, we're going to play our library. We're going to put 2 cards in the library. We're going to turn them sideways. We're going to gain our lore, and then we're going to put an 8 willpower card in play that reads either get rid of this, I gain a lore, or get rid of my characters and I draw cards. Best card ever for this deck because I cannot tell you, I made the joke all day that I had some of the smartest characters in Disney Lorcana. It's not a lie. In some of the games that I played, I had up to 6 characters reading books in the library. Very, very fun card in this deck. Very powerful card in this deck. And it's a card that I couldn't even argue if you went back to 4 of them. The more weird additions to the deck became Amethyst Chromacon and Bruni. We're going to see the list that Bruni was successful with in the Sunday competitive event coming up. But the Amethyst Chromacon was an addition for the DLC Vegas. It was a card that said, you know what? Some games we just need to put this in play and draw extra cards because it's the only way and the only chance we have at winning the game. And even though we're fueling our opponent, we're hoping that the low curve of this deck is getting more benefit from it. If every single turn past turn 4, I can read, draw my cards, and put 2 threats into play, I have the best chance of winning the game. And that's kind of where this card is. It's not really a card that we are ever playing, in all honesty, before turn 4 or 5, unless we're forced to. In some cases, like if our turn 4 is Chromacon and then dock, it's not really what we want. We more likely want to play character and then dock and then draw into Chromacon. So next turn we can play Chromacon, draw 2 cards, and then drop a 2 and a 1. That's really what we want to be doing, or drop 2 1s, whatever it turns into. But it was kind of a different card to play. There were games where this was the best card ever, and I won games because I had Chromacon in my deck. And then there were games where I lost because I had Chromacon in my deck because I drew into it. I'm just like, man, this is not what we needed. This is not good in this matchup. I can't just fuel my opponent because they get actually more benefit out of me. An example against Steel Songs, all you're doing is like helping them draw into their songs that they can play for free with just by exerting characters. It's just not where we want to be. So you got to pick your poison with this card and with this, like with that in general. Bruni was a card that Ryan Miles was trying to settle on. I believe that is like our last deck list that we're looking at here. Ryan wanted to go a little bit bigger. He wasn't as fan of the Cuscos. We actually had a very long debate about whether or not that's true. I strongly disagree with Ryan, but I can see the world where Bruni is a card that we want, and it's a card that's playable in certain given matchups. It does give us like a better answer to Diablo. If they don't have the answer, just remove Bruni. It's also just evasive 2 lore gainer, which we can just turn sideways. So like that Pascal can just represent 3 lore a turn that most decks don't have a good answer to aside from a board wipe. So I can definitely see the leverage for him. It's a card that we'll continue to explore with moving forward to see if it is worth it. If you're not into Bruni, you have to understand again that like the higher we go in the curve, like those cards need to be inkable because we're almost always inking them before we play dock because it's a way better turn 4 if we go 2 cost plus dock because it represents more lore, it draws more cards guaranteed. So you're almost always inking Goat early. You're almost always inking Bruni early. We're almost always inking Fox early unless it's like the best trade ever is represented. All in all, this deck really did just come through in the biggest of ways. It was able to pick up 2 top 32s on Friday, which was good for 75 tickets each. With the 7 tickets that we got for signing up for the event was over 80 tickets. That's 8 Rapunzels. It picked up, a Let It Go and 3 wins of 20 tickets or more in the Saturday main event, which was a Let It Go plus 3 more Rapunzels. That's 11 Rapunzels. And then on Sunday, Ryan was the only one that played the deck. Dick and I did not play on Sunday. We kind of just relaxed and vibed. And Ryan took this deck to another top 32 for another 80 tickets, which was 4 more Rapunzels. You're talking 18 Rapunzels on the weekend, which is insane. A Let It Go, insane. This deck is $68. That was the registered deck on Saturday. $68 won over $2,500 in prizes on the weekend. It is definitely a deck I suggest to play in set champs. I would have been even more excited to play with this deck in a best of 3 format. Your play games are so very good. Your draw games are very realistic against the majority of the field. I can't honestly tell you that if you're on a budget and you're looking to just play a more low to the ground deck, a strategy, an aggro deck, I believe this is the best aggro deck in the field. I believe it gives you the most opportunity to win games on the draw as an aggro deck. And I believe it's one of the fastest decks in the game that has the most problematic cards. A lot of the cards in this deck have 3 willpower. They don't just fold to the majority of the metagame. They really are creating these 2-turn clocks, which means every single one of those cards is gaining 2 or more lore on average. Library, phenomenal. So very hard to deal with. This deck, honestly, I can't praise it anymore. It's one of the best decks in the game. I was so very confident after the success on Friday going into Saturday. I came 1 point shy. I honestly came 1 lore shy. In round 9, I died on 19 lore. And on the turn I died, I had the ability to draw 3 cards. If any of those 3 cards read gain a lore, I would have won. I would have been able to go to 48 points. I would have been in one of the top 8 seeding on the day, and I would have took this deck to a top 64 on the play in a best of 3, and I would have felt very comfortable into just about any matchup in that situation. 2 games on the play with this deck, I would have felt great. So I definitely suggest to you that if you're looking for a deck for set champs, this is absolutely the best budget deck for set champs. And in all honesty, it's one of the best decks for set champs, period. I think it's very well positioned. If you're looking to add into it, if you're looking for it to be molded a little bit better, you might just have to go a little bit heavier. You might have to play more Smash. You might have to play more Pete. You might need the 4th library. Those 3 cards are definitely cards I would look at just to give yourself a little bit more of a better matchup into Emerald Steel. Aside from that, you're going to crush Red Blue. You're going to crush Ruby Amethyst. You're just going to honestly annihilate those matchups. So thank you so much for watching today. If you're looking for more videos like this, let me know in the comments if you like this kind of a structure for a basically 1 deck meta breakdown and the position that it's in within that. I would love to know. I'd like to do more of these if you are interested. Definitely hit that like button for me if you haven't yet. Hit subscribe if you're looking for more meta reports and more videos like this. Thank you guys so much for watching. Catch you in the next one.